Welcome to Table Stakes. I'm Michelle Stevens, course director at CXM Academy. My guest today is Nils Stotz. He's published research on experimentation programs and how to build organizations that actually get smarter through testing. He's here to help us understand the difference between testing stuff and building a real learning engine. Nils, welcome to Table Stakes.
Thanks a lot for the invite. I really appreciate it. I really like this format, and I'm super happy to talk about my favorite topic, experimentation.
Yeah, when you said yes, I was excited as a child, to be honest, because I've been following you on LinkedIn for quite a while, and every time you publish a post, I go like, oh, I learned something new. Like for instance, today you published something on metrics, and I really enjoyed it. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for these kind words. This really is motivating to do more, no?
Yeah. No, but I mean, you are a genuine expert in your field. You're also recognized for that, and so super happy that you're there. Niels, I have a question right off the bat. What is experimentation? Because we hear a lot about it, but aside from people running around with these experiments, I had a feeling like nobody really knows what it is.
Yeah. Or everybody knows something, but it's all different, right? One time I even had like one post that lists 19 different definitions in academia, what experimentation means in like the context of product management, stuff like this. But so I would say it's kind of an issue because we haven't really like clearly defined it, right? But like ultimately, I think the one group thinks about like experimentation as like purely A/B testing, right? So to say like, okay, you solve something or you understand how users behave to a change that you're making in the product and how they react to it and how this, boils down into metrics. But I think about it in a more broader way, right? So for me, experimentation, or how I like to also phrase it, continuous experimentation, is sort of a way how organizations operate, right? So there are a lot of different use cases for experimentation, and ultimately, of course, it helps you to understand if the change that you're suggesting is better than your initial version, right? This is classic A/B testing, but also think about like the overall impact that you're creating with all the changes that you ever did in the form of like holdout experiments. Or, for example, like where we recently had like quite a huge conference talk about is the idea of trade-offs, right? So if you do not run changes in your product over an experimentation platform, there is no way that you see like how this change affects like all the other things that you're doing in your product, right? And I think like this for me has so many aspects and so many implications that this goes far beyond like how a lot of people think about like pure testing and A/B testing. Also, if you take this even a step further, it leads for me also to, let's say, evidence-driven leadership or evidence-driven organizations ultimately. And this also affects the way of working, right? I see a lot of people, that are coming into the industry, very, very smart people, and they understand, there are certain decisions that they 100% know they're not true, they're not proven, and they know it's only an opinion, and it frustrates them a lot, right? And experimentation ultimately gives them a tool to basically, work against this and basically say, hey, we are evidence driven. We do not have opinions on something and execute based on these opinions. We rather say we have hypotheses, we have beliefs, and we want to test them. And that's how we operate. So for me, it's like a whole organizational, I don't like the word culture, but like, let's say, organizational operating model, right?
So I really like how you position that, because experimentation is not it is a discipline. It's not just a tactic. It's not something that you just do. Basically, it's like with agile. You don't do agile. You are agile or you're
Yeah,
not. Right?
exactly. It's
Yeah.
a status. Yeah.
um, which means there is a real difference between a high impact experimentation culture. Well, we don't call it a culture, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
And one that is just running tests, right? But what separates a high impact experimentation culture from one that is just testing stuff? What is
Yeah.
the difference between those two?
Yeah, so I think this high impact culture or organization is ultimately, um, as I said, it goes beyond this use case of just saying like this version is better than this version, and that's why we ship this. Experimentation goes far beyond that. Just to or like high impact experimentation goes far beyond that. For example, think about often I discuss with how can you experiment with strategy, right? I mean, in the end of the day, what you do as leadership, right? You try to set goals of how you believe the future will be, right? Nothing will help you ultimately with that. Of course, you take all the different data, but there's no ultimate truth, right? This conclusion you need to make for yourself, and that is the bet that you're making. What experimentation can also help you is to ultimately understand if you're actually executing against the strategy. And I think this is an aspect that did also not really arrive at most organizations yet, because if you have, for example, very conflicting goals, right? Like, because of course organizations want to do a lot of stuff, right? And sometimes they don't even understand that one thing is affecting the other thing. And like, again, when you run things over your experimentation platform, even if it's only for, like, basic use cases where we just say, okay, I want to understand like this obvious improvement, then you will still see like what other metrics are affected. And if you say, for example, I don't know, I work towards a certain goal, like, to increase order frequency or something like this. But on the other hand, you have also like higher returns if you do certain measures, then you already found like a dynamic in your organization or in your business model that you need to account for, right? Because like if you in the first step basically surface this and say, hey, here's a dynamic, if we touch this, usually this gets affected, then you need to address this in your strategy the next time you're making them, because that's what the team needs. Because if you tell a team, hey, work on this metric and improve it, they say, okay, I will work on this metric, and no matter what, I will increase it, right? But like the other team says, like, this is not a good thing. We don't like this because it's harming our metric. That's not a good organizational setup. And that's why it's just so important to have like one central platform that really helps you to surface the dynamics, address the dynamics, and then already make decisions before these dynamics or the outcome of the single experiments, like turn out, for the different teams.
Yeah, that is something that I've seen not that long ago, actually, where a team was actually pushing for faster delivery times. And at
Yeah.
some point, they said, okay, we're going to try and deliver today. So if you order today, you get delivered today. And
Mm.
what they saw was that at a certain point, the higher ticket items, they got returned much faster as a
Yeah.
result of that faster shipping, because trust was broken down, and it took them quite a long time to figure it out what had actually changed, because you would think faster shipping times means higher customer satisfaction. That was the hypothesis, but
Yeah.
nobody tested it, and it was just in
Yeah.
a live production environment that they figured it out, which was
Yeah.
painful.
Of course. And I also often say, sometimes the metrics that are affected, they're not that obvious as well, right? So for example, think about like return rate. It's a super important metric in e-commerce and also for Zalando, of course. And you know, I mean, for example, in Zalando, we have a return window of like 30 days, right? So it takes a while until this actually arrives, and you can actually see how this actually is affected. It just literally takes a while. And also, for example, think about like support tickets, right? This is also something that is often underestimated. If you do a change where you think like this makes a lot of sense, but in reality, it's creating a lot of confusion for the customers, then the customers will contact the support. And like before you understand that this thing, like this increase in support tickets is related to this change that you made, you need to categorize the tickets. You need to really understand, okay, is this related to this thing? And this is sometimes really not that obvious, especially like in large organizations, right? But if you understand the dynamics, you understand your business. And if you understand your business, you can make way better decisions that address the trade-offs that you're willing to make in your strategy.
Yeah, yeah, it's all interconnected. It's an entire system. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
You've published work on the difference between test level metrics and program level metrics, which I found really interesting. But can you explain that? What is difference between those two?
Yeah. It was such an unsurfaced area, right? We won the best paper award for this, by the way. Just to mention
Of
this.
course.
So I mean, ultimately, like what we often talk about is like, okay, we have a single experiment. What metrics should we use? So what we just talked about. So we basically say, okay, we have like a primary metric, some guardrail metrics, and then we see like how the primary metric is affected and if the guardrail metrics are broken. This is for a single experiment. But I work in an experimentation program team, right? Experimentation platform team, right? When you work in teams like this, you're not interested in individual experiment, but you're rather interested in how your entire program looks like, right? And there you have metrics related to different things. I mean, the obvious thing is, of course, something like volume, like how many experiments are you running? How is this distributed between the different teams? Maybe between the different applications, between different UI elements, maybe even products. So also the volume already has a lot of nuances that you can go deeper into. But then, of course, also things like quality, right? This is the post I was making today. If you say there's always a huge debate that I also often, like debate or that I'm, involved in. You say, should we rather focus on volume or quality? And when you say quality, I often ask what you mean by quality, because you can always, criticize the quality of something, but this is also something that just needs to be defined, right? And what I did in this work and in this paper is to just put like the 6 different categories and 18 different metrics that basically can address all the different aspects of a program. How long it takes to create an experiment, for example, as well. What is the ROI of like the different elements of an experiment? They are all on a meta level and discover or like look at the experimentation program itself and not only on an individual experiment, right? So that is the difference. And I think this was like very unsurfaced before we published this.
Yeah, so you're basically measuring different things at different levels, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Exactly.
but
Right.
but that also means that the way you organize your team matters, because that has an implication on that. And so my question is, how should experimentation teams be structured? Is
Mm.
there is there a right organizational model for that? And if so, what is it?
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's actually like also like another paper that we published, right? So basically, there's no like very clear answer in our opinion on this, because what matters is not only how you structure the team, but also which product operating model you're into, right? If you're in the fully like textbook Marty Kagan product operating model, then it's all fine and you can have like a decentralized team, like, and one central team that is working the experimentation platform. And basically the decentralized teams, they don't really need support. Maybe they will ask the experimentation platform team once in a while something, but by default, every product team will just do experiments. If it's very feature driven, then it's a different story, right? Because then you probably have not really the incentive. I mean, if you're developing a certain feature or if you're working on a certain feature, you need to make sure that this feature survives and is continued and so forth. So there's not a real or like a strong incentive for you to do or run more experiments. So maybe in these kind of setups, if you want to create this product operating model more, then you need something in between, like a center of excellence or something like that, that helps the teams to really get into experimentation mode, right? But like overall, I think to answer this, traditionally before that, before our paper, I think we always talked about like decentralized center of excellence as a setup that you just decide for your organization. And what we basically created is then a taxonomy that says, well, yes, those are three modes that are possible, but they depend on where the organization currently is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, but there is also this constant pressure to move fast. But there is also, of course, that need for quality. And I ask myself, what's the balance, and how do you find that balance between velocity in its own right and quality in experimentation? How do you balance that? Because for me, that is something that is totally not clear.
That's one of the most interesting questions that I would also like, I don't know, publish a lot of stuff about. But like, I mean, first, maybe I can tell you like my conviction is that from velocity or from volume follows quality, because this is just my experience in so many areas of life, right? If you do a lot of things, and if you sort of like enjoy the process more of doing these things, then automatically your quality gets higher. There's a super nice anecdote, I think, in a book of James Clear, right? I don't know if you know about this, but there's like this photographer's class, right? And they basically get a task from their professor. And he says to like one half of the class, he says, take as many pictures as possible, you know, like, and submit them to me. And the other one get told only take one single picture, and you know, like you get graded on this, right? And ultimately, the ones that took a lot more pictures, they got the better grading, or just overall had the better, you know, pictures. And what we learned from this, that the question that always stuck to my mind, you know, those people are photographers, right? And like the negative case or the negative assumption is, if you tell people do a lot of stuff of something, they kind of try to juice the stats. But they are photographers. They decided that they want to learn this. Why should they make bad pictures, right? And it's the same with experimentation. I think like we should not assume that when we tell people run a lot of experiments, that they then do like things that don't make sense or like simple things. Yes, they will make them smaller, of course, but that's good because then they learn the process more. Because it to run an experiment itself, like it's usually just the smallest aspect, at least in organizations with a lot of traffic, right? But the alignment and all these things that you need to figure out, they take the time away. And if you then on top of that say, well, we will evaluate an experiment on quality, you make this barrier even higher. If you say we don't even care that much about quality, right? They just have more incentive to say, okay, let's keep going, and also like think about their own process. So of course, if you set up like 3 experiments per year, it takes a lot of time because it feels like everything is done from scratch. But if you run like you know, 3 per month or 3 per week, then it's a different story because you have everything set up, everyone knows what he or she has to do, and that's kind of like the kind of setup or operating model that I want to achieve. And that's why I would answer this very clearly with always go for volume. Yeah.
Yeah, you wrote something about that not that long ago, actually, and I was looking at it, and I was actually thinking about, but Nils, what comes first? Does the velocity come first? So the volume, does that come first, or is the quality of your output a consequence of the fact that you need a process to
Yeah,
process all
exactly.
these experiments? And I was a little bit, well, I wouldn't say confused, but I was thinking about that, and I had the feeling that I was going around in circles, to be honest, because I was like, yeah, I don't have the answer to that
Of
question.
course, I think no one has the answer, right? But like my clear hypothesis around this is like the quality follows from the velocity, right? If you incentivize with velocity, the quality will follow. That is my key assumption or key hypothesis.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, a lot of organizations are stuck in a culture of testing for winners. So they're looking on their next big bet. It's also a little bit what you described there.
Yeah.
They're looking for the next win, right? And how do you break out of that? How do you change that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, right, like you need to also show these I mean, of course you need to identify sort of like who is pushing for this or who is like where this comes from. I always say like, these cultural aspects or organizational aspects, you also need to treat them like a product. So it's not like I don't know how your organization works, right? You need to find this out. Like, why do people act in a certain way? That's the discovery you need to make. But I think like what helps in a case where just a lot of people do experiments just to get winners, for example, is to provide them with more use cases, right? I mean, experimentation is, as I said, also like a way to find the trade-offs in your company. Is also a way to provide or mitigate risks that is coming from your deployments. It's also a way, like to test, like nice hypotheses or make sure that you don't deteriorate your product. So there are a lot of more use cases other than, just showing that, like you pick the winner. Because often, like you also do experiments where it is kind of obvious that a certain primary metric that it will be improved, right? So
Mhm.
that's often not even like the big news, right? The big news is then rather like, okay, like, wow, by the way, one particular group seemed to have reacted even very positive, like a younger group or an older group or a group from this
Mhm.
market or that market or certain attributes. Those heterogeneous treatment effects, and you see them everywhere, right? And this can then give you like material basically for a new experiment. What if we emphasize this even more for this market or for this kind of particular customer group? So to just say, okay, we optimize our product or we provide more wins is too linear, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, Niels, if there is a CX leader, a customer experience leader, listening to this and thinking about, okay, so how do I apply all this into my reality? What would your advice be for the first step, basically? How would you go about that?
Yeah. As I said, right, like I would say the first thing is really to understand the current setup of your organization. Try to understand if it's rather like feature led, if it's like already applies some of the product operating models. Also try to understand how the decision culture is done. Are people like willing to make risky decisions or non-risky decisions? And based on this, like make the first steps. If people or leaders that have an important position struggle to understand or like to give a clear goal, tell them, hey, experimentation can solve this in a way that we surface like all the different trade-offs. If people are like, we do not really know if a certain feature was better, provides more than what we had before, then you pitch them the use case of like A/B testing as a mechanism to clearly show you this and show you also the impact of this. So I would say the narrative that you need to create in order to convince people or to start a culture really depends on what the current narrative is. And based on this current narrative, you need to provide like a change management and a change culture. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's it. Thank you. Uh, so it all starts again with good change management. So Niels, thank you so much for being here and for showing us that experimentation is about building a learning organization and not just running tests. Even though that has its merit. Thank you so much, Niels.
Of course. Thanks a lot for the invite.
You're very welcome. And thanks to all of you watching and listening. The companies that will win aren't the ones that aren't the ones that test the big things, but they're the ones that learn on a continuous basis. So that's table stakes. Until next time, here or in one of our courses. Take care.